Hi, everyone. This is Jason Burek of Wall Street for Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street for Main Street podcast interview. Today, Mo Dawood and I are joined by Riggs Eckelberry, CEO of Origin Oil. Origin Oil is an advanced biofuels company working out of the algae biofuel sector. Thank you for joining us here today, Riggs.
How's it going, guys?
Going good, Rig. Thanks for coming on. The first topic we like to discuss is peak oil. And one of the things people take for granted is cheap oil. And yet people still don't realize that one of the main reasons why oil prices is going up is because of peak oil. Now, peak oil does not mean we're out of oil, but it actually means that we're seeing a decline in production of the light, sweet crude oil that we are used to today, the AKA cheap oil. Do you believe peak oil is having a profound impact on the oil price today?
Well, I think what's happening is that, I'm not an oil man, but they're having to, the easy oil is going away. And so you're getting oil that costs, it costs a barrel to get 2 barrels kind of thing. And, of course, that's much less efficient. It's more expensive. It's, of course, much more environmentally toxic. They're talking about if you were going to do a full implementation of the tar sands, you would cut down a forest the size of Florida to do it, and that is, beyond ridiculous. I mean, the Indian communities in that part of the world are suffering from being downstream toxins, and it's necessary evil at this point. I don't think anybody actually says we should, cause an oil shock. What we do need to create is alternatives and competitors to oil. And, of course, the best competitor to petroleum is petroleum itself, which is algae.
And I think that's a good point, Riggs. And to add to some of Mo and yours points about, the cheap oil crisis, like not only are we going into geopolitically unstable areas like, Iraq, and it looks like we're going to be in 6 months probably in Iran to go and, take care of their oil, but, we're dealing with Nigeria, we're dealing with Venezuela, and then on top of that, like the production costs for some of these oil and the environmental risks that we're taking, we can have a Macondo blowout. We have Petrobras who's going, I believe, under 5,000 feet of seawater and then under another 10 or 15,000 feet of rock to get their oil out. So, we're just taking so much risk just to get oil, just to keep our, heads above water.
That's what it's going to be. It's more and more treadmill. So what do we do about it? Obviously, the oil companies need to continue to do their job, and we can't have a lot of war and all that crazy stuff. We got to keep things on an even keel, because remember that recessions don't help the alternative energy industry either. So as much as possible, we need to sort of keep things from being shaken up too much, and at the same time scale up. We have shown, as I think you've seen in the recent days, that there is a study that Origin Oil did that showed that gasoline and diesel could be created on-site by algae producers for as little as $2.28 a gallon from a blend of algae and waste. And the pure algae wasn't far behind at about $5.50. So given that right now fuel, of course, algae is being sold at a premium, that's a profitable business today, but it also means that pretty soon we're going to have true parity. All it takes is to scale up. Now, what does that mean? You want to build a 125-acre site, it's going to take a little while, and it's going to take some money. So, I don't want to minimize the time that it's going to take to do this, but it really helps that you have a strong commitment from the Department of Defense, U.S. Navy alone needing to have 8 million barrels of jet fuel and marine diesel from alternative sources, non-food sources, by 2020, and they want algae to be in the mix. So that's a huge stimulation for the process. They will issue unconditional offtake agreements that will allow people to get financing, et cetera.
Now, Riggs, I think you jumped ahead a little bit with some of the deals and some of the investments that are being put into algae. For our listeners who are not familiar with algae biofuels, can you tell our listeners what are some of the positive environmental benefits of using algae oil instead of petroleum?
Well, the first one is a negative gain, which means that if you have an algae spill, then you just have a bunch of green water. It's completely beneficial to the environment. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, algae can be used and is being used to turn desert areas to green the desert, so to speak. So algae is completely beneficial to the environment. But let's look at some of the positive benefits. When you create algae, you're doing a huge amount of CO2 absorption, 2 tons of CO2 for every ton of algae, and you also get a ton of oxygen out of that. So you're oxygenating the environment, you're taking the CO2 out. Also, algae loves wastewater, nitrates, toxins, all that stuff. I mean, the reason we have algae blooms in the ocean and rivers is because of the excess fertilizer runoff, and algae loves that. So, again, if you're making algae with that wastewater, you're taking that out of the runoff, and you're growing, a valuable product. So in terms of waste uptake, algae is fantastic. Then you go ahead and you create it, having created it. And by the way, these are jobs that are not going to be exported to China because they have to be here where the CO2 is. Once you've created this stuff, you burn it. It doesn't have all the heavy metals and sulfur and so forth that you have in petroleum because it was never fossilized. So it doesn't have the mineral fractions that petroleum has. You burn it. It obviously has to be burned completely just like petroleum at that point. But the real important part here is it's not going to cause a lot of toxic effects from all the fossilized minerals that are in petroleum. And that's the ultimate benefit. When you burn the algae, you're putting the CO2 back in the atmosphere that it took. That is called a neutral cycle, a virtuous carbon cycle, where you're taking what you need to grow the algae and then you're returning it to the atmosphere. And for every ton of algae-based fuel that you use, you are not using a ton of fossil fuels, which means that CO2 from the fossil fuels is not being put out into the environment. So we call that a net gain. So all in all, algae is a pretty fantastic fuel. Of course, it doesn't need cropland. It doesn't need fresh water. So, fresh water is a huge issue in the world. It likes brackish water, salt water, ocean water, whatever. And all it needs is sunlight and CO2. So, I'd find it very hard to find a better energy crop out there.
Excellent point. And algae can be used on radioactive water as well. Is that correct?
Algae has been proven to absorb radioactive isotopes, and it was shown as early as Hiroshima that it had a beneficial effect in taking isotopes out of people's bodies, and of course it can come out of the water and so on. So what there's potential for in places like Japan is to detox the wastewater and so forth in ways that nothing else can.
That's very exciting news. And my next question regarding algae is, how much of an impact can algae have on reducing the U.S. dependency on crude oil from foreigners? Can it make an impact in that area?
Well, the minute you start making any kind of fuel from sustainable sources, you are going to create competition for petroleum, and that's a good thing. So, what we're going to see over time is some of the, we have very cheap natural gas right now. That's not going to be true forever, but it's true right now. And gasoline is still cheap and relatively cheap and available. But what's going to happen is that the U.S. military is not concerned about cost per se. They're concerned about energy security, and they're investing heavily in these alternative biofuels. So that is going to make the military a net lower demand organization. They use as much fuel, as much energy as the entirety of Sweden. So think about that. All of a sudden you take Sweden off the map, or at least half of Sweden. That is a huge demand reduction for petroleum. Similarly with aviation over time, all this as it scales up is going to have a very strong effect. Now, will we see biofuels in people's gas tanks in the next couple of years? I don't think so. Why? Because the military and aviation are paying a premium, and because a lot of chemicals purchasers want to buy the algae instead of burning it. So, we're going to see what happened in the 90s when Amazon.com came on, and they didn't destroy the booksellers overnight, but what they did take was they took their most profitable business. And this is what's going to happen with algae, is it's going to come in for fine chemicals, which are very high profit for petroleum companies, and it's going to skim off their high profit business, and the petroleum companies are going to be left with the much less profitable oil and gas business. So that's how it's going to go, and it's going to cause disproportionate harm to them. They realize that. That's why they're investing in algae.
And how soon do you think then that algae biofuels, once they're scaled up, and algae bioplastics can be economic without a subsidy?
How long?
Yeah.
Well, our model showed that algae could be cost-effectively turned into fuel without subsidy with the current new technologies that are coming online, like ours and others, if you built a footprint of at least 50 hectares. So it does require scale. And I would say the subsidies needed are at the R&D level today to get to that scale. But once you get to that footprint, then you're able to, we've shown clearly you can operate profitably.
Excellent point. And we are not a great believers in subsidies. And, I mean, look at corn ethanol. The subsidy in corn ethanol has caused a major food shortage around the world, due to higher prices. And it's not a very efficient use of energy, compared to algae. So what is preventing algae to, becoming well known and being pushed forward by our government here in this country and throughout the world?
I think we have great support. As I say, the DoD is invoking. It has wartime powers called the Defense Production Act that they can invoke, and they are invoking it. And DOE and USDA are teaming up with them on that strategy. And of course, we are in a research agreement with DOE to establish the standards for all this. But that's going to create a huge demand in this country. So I'm very happy with how it's going in the U.S. Australia's got a very strong carbon regulation, and I think we're going to see a lot of progress there. And in fact, there are some major algae players, one of whom is our customer. I think we're going to see a lot more action in both Australia and Europe that's strategic in nature, with the military, with airlines, and also with carbon reduction based on Australia's very strong carbon policy.
Now, Riggs, I want to ask one more question here comparing corn ethanol to algae, because we just have, a large and larger portion of the corn crop going inefficiently, in my opinion, to corn ethanol, and then forcing, people to use it. And really, the only people, in my opinion, who are really benefiting from corn ethanol are farmers who get the subsidy to grow it, and then someone like Archer Daniels Midland, because the energy return on energy invested advantage, there is no advantage for corn ethanol. So can you talk about the energy return on energy invested advantages that algae has over a crop like corn ethanol?
Well, first of all, there is the sheer productivity. Even without the new advanced growth techniques, algae is at least 30 times more productive than corn. And as I say, new production techniques are multiplying that even further. So
wow.
In terms of productivity, there's no question that algae is outstrips corn. And then, of course, even if corn were as productive, the fact that it needs fresh water, it needs land that could be devoted to food crops, then you're really talking about a biofuel that is not going to be able to scale to the level needed to compete with petroleum. And this is true of any crop, any land crop, is going to have a problem because it tends to displace food crops, as we've seen in Brazil, where the sugar cane used for fuel has pushed out the soybean growers, and the soybean growers have pushed out the ranchers, and the ranchers are going into the Amazon. Now, how is that helpful?
Yeah, and it's going to create a negative feedback loop for people, who live on the margin, the poor people, who barely can afford the next meal. They're the ones who are going to get hurt the most, by a small price increase then in their daily meal like corn or soybeans, etc. So I think algae would definitely have another advantage in that regard over, the other first-generation biofuels.
Exactly. No, there's no question we have to move on. We've got to get, onto sustainable biofuels. But, the only reason why these other biofuels have been implemented, and, even though they're unsustainable, it's a good thing that they've been there just to pioneer a lot of this alternative stuff. The only reason that they've been there is because algae's technology issues have not been resolved. Algae is great, but there were some key technology issues that made it uneconomical and unsustainable. Those have been resolved at the harvesting stage, of course, by Origin Oil, but also at the growth stage by some advanced growth techniques that are coming on the market and that are being adopted, and also downstream converting that stuff into things like fuels, chemicals, foods, etc. So the new technologies are creating the breakthrough. You couldn't have had that 10 years ago. And
a lot of these technological advances, you would say they occurred in the last 3 to 5 years?
The last, even less. I would say that we are seeing, for us, 3 years ago is when we found our single-step extraction technique. The growth stuff has been showing up in the last 3 years as well. So yeah, I would say, the last 2-3 years has been the big inflection point. You call it a hockey stick. That's a good tech word to use.
Yeah, critical mass. Where you reach critical mass.
Exactly.
Well, let's talk about your company a little bit more, Origin Oil. Now, Origin Oil, it seems like that you're catering to commercial clients such as the military and aviation industry. Is that your niche for right now, or do you have a plan to go out to reach to ordinary people on Main Street to start using algae to pump gas into their car?
Well, our model is actually to be a licensor of technology. We're not going to be in the market distributing these products. We want to be the intel inside and let other people sell product downstream. And it makes us agnostic. We're happy to work with anyone. If somebody wants to step up to the plate and distribute gasoline to the mass markets, we will be in there. We'll be, powered by Origin Oil. That's what it's going to be. So that we think that's a great model because it's very flexible, doesn't require vast amounts of capital, and just like a company like Qualcomm or Dolby Labs, these guys have a really, really great business, and they don't have to do the massive investment that the operators in the business, like the mobile phone operators, have to make.
Yeah, and you don't have to take on, a massive amount of debt to build the plant. And then, you can keep, shareholder dilution to a very, very minimum here and keep a good, solid capital structure, and that's something that's going to go a long way to building shareholder value.
Exactly.
Well, I just have one more question here about the interview, and it's going to be kind of a long one, but it's about your company. So what for our listeners out there who might be interested in looking at your company, what near-term news and growth catalysts does Origin Oil have in the next 18 to 24 months for its business plan to grow the top and bottom lines and perhaps move the stock price higher?
Certainly. Well, I have to caution you that we really can't comment on the company's shares or financials for the reason that we are in quiet period. But I can tell you that from a business point of view, the company is doing very well with commercialization. You saw the announcement this morning that we have a deal to build a showcase site in near Paris, which is exciting. And we're going to continue doing that. Our strategy, and as shown in our company presentation on the investor tab of our site, is to develop reference sites all over the world to start signing up distributors and so forth. And we've set ourselves some goals, and we actually tend to meet our goals. So it's an exciting time for us. We are continuing to be the technology player in the algae industry. And by the way, there's rarely more than one pure technology player. Like there's only one Qualcomm, there's only one Dolby Labs. Basically, if you're in the business of doing something embedded technology-wise, then you tend to be unique. So we're the unique company in the algae space that is doing technology, and we're going flat out to turn the company into a profitable and a dominant member of the algae industry.
Yeah, in analyzing your company, comparing it to some of the other companies in the algae industry, you guys have a really unique business model. And, you guys just have so much news flow coming out, and from past experiences investing, that news flow leads to deal flow, and deal flow leads to, those revenue streams, a lot of cash flow. So I think you guys are very well positioned. You're doing a good job, and I think you guys are approaching, that tipping point, that critical mass where you guys start becoming, self-sustaining, and you start, just going on that hockey stick, like you said, in the very near future.
You know what? I love what you're saying, and, I really appreciate your strong support. I agree. If companies are able to manage a flow of substantial information, then over time, I believe they do succeed.
Okay, Rig. Well, thank you for coming on to our podcast show. If people want to find out more about Origin Oil, where can they go?
Well, originoil.com has a great deal of information, and we welcome you to get on our newsletter. At the bottom of every page, there's a place where you can sign up and get updates from us, and we look forward to having you as part of our audience.
And one final question, Riggs. You guys said you're in a quiet period. Does that mean then that you guys are planning on listing on a major U.S. exchange very shortly? If you can answer that for us. Well,
we've publicly stated that this current S1, which is as you know another word for an IPO or uplisting IPO, is specifically for the purpose of going on NASDAQ. We can't, of course, comment on the status of it, but that has been publicly disclosed.
Okay.
Well, that's good news. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Well, thank you for coming on the show.
It's my great pleasure. Thank you, gentlemen.